Cup of Joe with your average Joe. Cup of Joe with Joe.
Hi.
Hi, Joe.
Wow, that was a great jingle.
Yeah. We had to, we went for something a little old-fashioned to match,
All
your
right.
age.
Well, thank you for highlighting my age.
You're
and,
welcome.
That I get the, award as the oldest person ever on this show.
Yes.
Maybe people in the chat can guess how old I am or
Yeah.
something.
Yeah. Don't be too harsh, guys. Don't be too
No,
harsh.
3 digits, okay?
All right. So, Joe, the question we're talking about is, what does God want me to major in? Can you tell me about that question?
Yeah, that's a really interesting topic. It hits home for me, especially because I took a lot of turns and made a lot of changes. I was a bio major throughout undergrad, pre-med the whole way. After I graduated, I worked in a chem lab, biochem lab. Then I kind of switched gears and I went into the whole startup route, trying to go into
Whoa.
the tech field,
Yeah.
right? And then I went to law school and practiced as a lawyer. And then I
Wow.
made another big turn and I went into full-time ministry after that.
Wow. Wow. So either you're like a jack of all trades or you're just really indecisive. I can't.
Or both.
Both, yeah. Or I should say a Joe of all trades.
Yeah, thanks.
That was terrible. I'm sorry. Okay, so back to the question. What does God want me to major in?
Okay, well, I think to cut to the chase, there's actually not much biblical support for the idea that God has a specific major for you, a specific plan for what you should study.
Really? Wait, because, back up. Your major, your career, that's a big part of your life, right? And if God has a plan for your life, wouldn't that be part of the plan?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're right that God has a specific plan for your life, but picking one major versus the other, like history versus biology, I mean, I don't think that's going to hijack God's plan for you.
Okay, I like the way you put that. It's not going to hijack God's plan for you. Like, it'd be really weird if God's up there in heaven and he's like, no, Joe, I wanted you to do history, not engineering, right? And like, you can derail God's plan for your life with just that one decision.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
that makes
exactly.
sense.
I mean, let me give you an example. I have kids. I think I'm a pretty loving dad. But, if they were to ask me, what would you like me to have for breakfast? I don't think I'd really care that much as long as it's healthy, like whether it's scrambled eggs or like Honey Nut Cheerios, I don't want you to be eating like cocaine for breakfast, but like, just as long as it's healthy.
Or for lunch or for dinner.
Yeah.
It's not a balanced part of the meal. Yeah. Wow, okay. That analogy makes sense. And I kind of see where you're coming from. Maybe it's not that as big a deal as we think it is. But the Bible does talk about how like God has a plan for our lives, right? And people talk about it, they say, what's God's will for your life? When you're thinking about your major, you're like, what's God's will for my life? So if the Bible doesn't talk about your major and your career that specifically, what is it talking about then?
Well, let's look at some characters in the Bible. I mean, there's some people that I think come to mind when you think of people who God had a specific plan for. So someone like Joseph, God had a plan for him. Yeah, great guy, right? Great name. And God had a plan for him to save, the known world there from famine and starvation. Moses, God had a plan for him to free the people, free the Israelites from slavery. And, if you look at these people, they had a lot of different changes in their career. What they studied or were experts in didn't matter.
Like Joseph was a slave and then became the prime minister. And then like Moses was Prince of Egypt. Great movie, by the way. And then he became a shepherd, right? So change of profession right there.
Yeah. And so, it's not really their expertise or what they were trained in that really matters so much as their character and their obedience to God. And, people often talk about like, what's God's will for me? Is his will for me to major in this or that? I actually did a search for Bible verses, of what is God's will.
You can do that now. It's really easy.
Yeah. And, I found some verses here and I'll just go ahead and read them to you. Okay.
Yeah, let's do it.
Okay. So 1 Thessalonians 4:3-4, for this is the will of God, your sanctification, that you abstain from sexual immorality, that each one of you know how to control his own body in holiness and honor. 1 Thessalonians 5:16-18, rejoice always, pray without ceasing, give thanks in all circumstances, for this is the will of God in Christ Jesus for you. 1 Peter 2:15-16, for this is the will of God, that by doing good you should put to silence the ignorance of foolish people. Live as people who are free, not using your freedom as a cover-up for evil, but living as servants of God. Okay, so all of these verses about God's will, okay, do you notice a pattern in these?
They're all about God's will. Yeah, like no, but that's really clear, right? It says the will of God, right? It's very clear that that's what it's about.
Yeah, and so I mean, it's all about the will of God, but it's pretty silent about like the details of choices you make, like things like what you should study, right? And if you look at them, the will of God verses, they all have to do about things about your character and obeying God in certain ways. So the First Thessalonians verses, they have to do about personal purity and sanctification, or about rejoicing and being thankful, having that posture of gratitude. The First Peter verses I shared, it was about how to treat other people, how to love them, how to be a servant, right? And so none of these verses, they have anything to do with like these kind of decisions about, what major you should choose. And so when it comes to doing God's will for your life, it's about obeying God, maturing in your character, to be more like him, right? To serve others, to love others, to be morally pure.
Wow. That's really good to hear. Well, so what I'm feeling right now is a lot of relief because I don't have to spend so much effort trying to figure out what my major is and not derail God's plan for my life. I can choose my major based on a variety of factors, what I'm good at, what other people know about me, what I like and I enjoy, what's going to get me a decent job, really, practical wisdom, stuff like that. But then the other thing that I'm feeling is now even more weight. I'm feeling something's even harder. And it's this idea that like, following God and following the will of God means I have to become a certain kind of person with a certain kind of character, like you mentioned, right? And that's the stuff that really matters. I liked how you put it earlier. Like it's like we think that major and career that's what really matters. But what really matters is character and obedience to God. I often get that flipped, right? But now that I'm like thinking about the right way, that feels really hard. Like I have to develop character and obedience, like no matter where I am, what I'm doing. That's pretty tough.
Yeah. So I think you got it just right. Like it's easier and harder at the same time. It's easier. I mean, man, like just picking your major, that's hard enough without trying to figure out some mysterious will of God for that. But at the same time, it also means it's harder because whatever you major in, whatever field of study you're in, you have to uphold yourself as a Christian, as a disciple of Christ. And so what does that mean? Like in your studies, obviously you're not going to be cheating or copying off other people.
Yeah, obviously.
Yeah, and it also means like you're going to have to work hard and be diligent and not slacking off in your classes. I think of Apostle Paul. And, he had a job, to support himself as a tent maker. And so I think he probably did a good job making tents. Like he didn't make cheapo tents that were going to fall apart.
Yeah, Amazon bestseller.
Yeah, 5 stars, right? And then in Colossians, there's a verse that says, whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord and not for men.
Yeah, that sounds really good. That sounds really good. Like, whatever I'm doing, I'm gonna make sure I'm honoring God in it. I gotta be a good person, full of integrity, that sort of thing. But what it sounds like is that's all you're saying. It's like the will of God for you is to just be a good person, just be a morally decent person in your job, and like that's it. Is that it?
Well, no, it's actually, that's just the baseline.
Oh, okay.
So
there's more.
I mean, like that's just a given. As a Christian,
that's true.
You're supposed to follow God, obey God. Work on your character. But it's much more than that, because the commands that God gives us is not only to have good character at your workplace, but you're also called to share the gospel with people, to be a minister, to be blameless at school and work, and that's. In addition to good character, your call is to be a minister. And there's a verse in the Bible that I think really brings us home. It's 2 Corinthians 5:18-20, and it says, all this is from God, who through Christ reconciled us to himself and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That is, in Christ, God was reconciling the world to himself, not counting their trespasses against them, and entrusting to us the message of reconciliation. Therefore, we are ambassadors for Christ, God making his appeal through us. And what this verse points out is that this is our calling. This is our primary identity. We're ambassadors for God, and we're supposed to also minister to them and share the gospel with them so that they can be reconciled to God. And so your major, your career, these things, that's not going to be your main identity. It's just something you do on the side. It's your side gig, right? And that's what you see in the Bible. Like, Apostle Paul, his main thing isn't making tents, right? He's not trying to innovate or start, go IPO with a tent making startup or something like that.
Yeah.
Luke, he was a doctor, right? But his main thing was that he is a minister of the gospel, and so he was following Paul around and sharing the gospel with others. Like different Christians in the Bible, they had different jobs, different careers. Some were soldiers, some were government workers, whatever their job is. Their main identity, their main calling was to be a minister, an ambassador for Christ, share the gospel with other people.
I think that's really well put. Our main calling is to be ministers of the gospel, ambassadors of the gospel, and whatever your day job is, that's your side gig. Love that. That's good. Thanks for your hot take on this question. And man, I think we earned ourselves a cup of Joe.
Oh,
all right, yeah.
Great.
Yep. And this is not decaf, so we're not sleeping tonight. Here we go. Okay.
Right, thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and throw it back to you guys. Justin and Esther, why don't you guys finish this off? I'm going to enjoy my cup of coffee.
Oh, it's pretty good.